This is the Unstarving Musicians podcast. I'm your host, Rabanzo. This podcast features conversations with me and indie music artists. Conversations intended to help other indie musicians be better at marketing, business, the creative process, and all the other things that empower us to do more of what we love. Wait for it. Make music. So as you know, I love sharing my personal experience and the things I'm learning from other musicians and songwriters here on the podcast. And you also know that you can be privy to those learnings by joining the Unstarving Musician community. In the process, you probably also know you'll be supporting this podcast. Just go to unstarvingmusician.com to join. In doing so, you'll get an email from me usually every 7 to 10 days with tips, hacks, insights, tricks, all the things you need to know to make your music journey a little better and brighter. And you'll also get a free gift from me, a token of my appreciation for being part of the Unstarving Musician movement. My guest for this episode, Laura Marie, is a San Antonio-based singer-songwriter referred to me by former guest Chris Taylor. You can find his episode in the show notes for this one, or you can go to unstarvingmusician.com and search for Chris Taylor. I'm really excited about this episode. I always enjoy interviewing my guests, always. But sometimes I admittedly go off track because I'm just having so much fun speaking with the artist. And in these cases, it feels like I forget sometimes about you, the listener. I may not ask the questions that matter most. I think I stayed on point for this conversation, though. So 81 episodes in, I am still learning. Laura, it turns out, has made a bit of money in licensing. She's been a speaker for the Northwest Folk Alliance. Her songwriting process has changed over the years, which she describes. She's pretty darn savvy about marketing on social and shares some mistakes she's made. She suffers from anxiety. She is a sexual assault survivor, a suicide attempt survivor, and today a voice for mental health and well-being. She's a red wine lover, as am I, so I had to throw that in there. And we talk about all of this and more. This turns out to be an important conversation for me, and I hope it will be for you too. Learn more about Laura Marie at lauramariemusic.com, and that's LauraMarie music.com. You can see the show notes too and get the link there. And hear her song, This Is a Call, at the end of this episode. Here's me and Laura Marie.
I do prefer red wine. And yes, I do like wine. I never used to like wine until my husband and I first went to Europe. And then it was like, that's what you drank instead of the water. So then I fell in love with wine.
Nice.
And then, and it's been a love of wine ever since.
That's funny.
Red.
That's funny. I had, my wife and I met in Texas and had some years together there. And then we moved to San Jose, California. And had 17 years there before moving to Panama, where we are now. But yeah, so we had a nice wine and spirit store where I lived in Arlington, and so I ventured in there and asked about it because they had a lot of wine, and so I'm slowly getting a little education on it. Would drink it, but I really didn't know much about it. And then we moved to California, kind of like when you went to Europe. But we moved to California, and one day we stumble into a winery to do some tasting that's on just a beautiful property close by where we lived, and that was all she wrote. We just kept learning more and more about the appreciation for it, and one of the first things I noticed about you when I was doing a little research is that you have done some licensing in your career, and you have a fairly long list of outlets or media companies that you've done some licensing with, and maybe a couple of different libraries or publishing. I'm kind of learning about licensing from the podcast actually, but a couple of different publishing libraries or whatever they're called that you've worked with or work with. How did that particular part of your journey began, and how much of it is part of what you do today?
It's not a huge part of what I do today, but I do still get checks from it, so that's great. It's a kind of a strange way that it happened. There's two ways it happened. One was that I was invited to speak at a conference in New York State. It was the Northwest Regional Folk Alliance. And while I was there, I was introduced to a woman who worked with one of these publishing companies. Oddly enough, though, I had submitted, she had put a sort of like one of those Reverb Nation things where you go and you submit your music and they may or may not, pick you. She had actually put one of those things on Reverb Nation. And at the time I was using Reverb Nation quite a bit, and I applied. And so oddly enough, she had accepted mine and sent me an email saying that they were interested in my music, or her partner did. At the same time I was meeting her, and then she was interested in my music. So I kind of ended up in their library that way. I don't know which one had more weight to it, the personal meeting or the sort of contest-ish thing that it was. So there was that way that my music got licensed to a number of different TLC shows and that sort of thing. And it's mostly just the instrumentals for that, which, kind of shocked me that I, opened up or got an alert from my bank account one day, like there's been a deposit of this, several $100s, whatever. And I go and it's a TLC show that's playing in, all over Europe, but also, running here in the States as well, that I've never watched. And that was kind of cool.
Is TLC a network?
There's that. Yeah. Yes. I don't know what TLC stands for.
Yeah. I feel like it's something from my past that I should remember, but I don't.
Yeah. It's like all those, it's Sister Wives, and there's a couple other shows that are along those lines. Something about the Bridezilla, some sort of Bridezilla show too. One of my songs just ended up just playing. It was basically the background music to some of those moments in those shows, which was it's nice. It's a nice to get placed, even if it's not one of the bigger placements where you feel like, oh, well, that's, you can really tell that's her, and now her name's mentioned at the end of the show or something. That would be great. I'd love that, but not quite to that extent with these particular placements.
Sure. I've had a couple of guests on in recent weeks that both, one of them basically does his life's work from a studio at home because he predominantly does licenses music. And the other one loves performing and has been for a long time, and songwriting, and he's quite a songwriter, and has a great network. And he has apparently has had a lot of success with licensing, and relationships were a big thing, and also just his own efforts to get out and sell himself, I guess, for best way I can describe it, and a little bit of luck, I suppose, but definitely having great relationships with the right people, and then realizing quickly that just because he got this or that, a publishing deal or whatever, that no one was going to sell it for him, so he went out and did a little of that. And those guys, for anyone who listens to this episode, are Lance Harville and John Christopher Davis, who are also at extreme opposite ends of the music spectrum. But if you want to check those out, well, that's cool. And then, is it still are you still pretty active in it? Yeah. Are you, you know what, one more.
It's one of those. Okay, go ahead.
One question before that. John Christopher Davis had said something to me, which makes complete sense, but I'm just kind of curious because I haven't talked to anyone else about it, is that he learned long ago to always keep I forgot what he called it. It was like it was basically a non-vocal version of every song he did. Do you do that?
Definitely. Yes, I do. Yeah.
It's just common sense with licensing, right?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, just if somebody's going to ask you, for the stems or something, you need to have them like ready to go. So, which is a reminder that I need to get that on my last, because I usually bug my producer about it, and then this particular one just got away from me. So yeah, that's one. And I know that question's already been posed to him, and it's just, there's a lot of stuff going on at the time with his studio and on my end as well. So I have not gotten on that one for this last particular single, but yeah, most time that's the standard.
And you had started to speak to the how active you are in it today. It sounds like it's maybe ongoing, but
it's ongoing. And there's another, I'm licensed to a few other libraries that happened during, I guess it was 2 albums ago, that we signed on with a promotion company. And then part of their whole deal was getting in particular libraries as well. And so that also happened. And I think it's one of those things that, you can have a song in there, like the licensing I got now. My songs had been in that library for about 4 or 5 years before anybody even picked up one of them. So it's one of those things that they're in there, and whether or not they get used, it could be down the line. And that's how it was also explained to me by the promotion company I'd been using at the time, was that, they had people who had their music in their library like going on 10 years before anybody, hit on it. And then all of a sudden you had these bands going back and going, they were all of a sudden in a movie, a song they did 10 years ago or 20 years ago or 15 years ago or something.
Mm-hmm.
And they had to go back and, promote that, something that they were, well past. For some people, that's a lifetime. Like some people who are really prolific, it's just like, oh my gosh, that song, I have to go back and deal with it and talk about it and, promote it and maybe re-release it or something like that. So yeah, so it's an ongoing process.
And, of course I have no idea how that world works or what goes on in the minds of music supervisors, but I would imagine that they just fortuitously come across someone's work and maybe they use it, or they just kind of gravitate to that work or that style of work, and for some of the projects they're working on, and maybe even get asked about it once they use it.
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, and I can see a lot of value in being able to go and speak. There's a lot of different conferences where there are music supervisors there, and having conversations and getting to know people, and there is a lot, building relationships with people that I can see where the benefit, it would really, put you ahead. I know some other people who are doing rather well in that, that vein, who have their stuff on major network stuff. I mean, I'm not, really close with these people, but I've been acquainted with them, and they are fearless in just going out there and saying, here I am, and I can do that, and I can give you what you want, and then producing it. And that's great. I am an incredible introvert when it comes to stuff like that. I'm not great at that. And I'll be the first to admit it. So it's no excuse. I tend to sort of sneak around, and try to every other avenue before I have to go out and shake hands and make small talk and that sort of thing. So that's probably not working so much in my favor, which is why I also do other things.
Well, here's my recommendation to you.
Yeah.
Practice with your dog.
Practice with my dog.
Yes,
I do.
Pitch your dog.
Yeah, I'm good with my dog. I'm her, she's my number one fan when I'm not annoying her.
she's got you networked into every licensing publishing library around, right?
Amongst the dogs, yes.
Yeah. So you mentioned that you did a speaking gig at the Northwest Regional Folk Alliance Conference. You think that was the one. Do you do a lot of speaking?
I don't do a ton of speaking. I have done some speaking on a number of subjects. This happened to be, I was working with a friend of mine, Madeline Sklar, who was the founder of an organization called the Go Girls. And it was basically a networking organization for women in music. And that was a kind of a lifesaver for me, because when I went out on my own, split from my band, I had a lot of issues sort of like touring on my own. I'm a sexual assault survivor, so I was kind of leery about, going to conferences and just like a lone woman out there, on my own. And being a part of that organization, you were always with a group. And that was a lifesaver for me. And she'd invited me, because I started working with her to do, doing some promotion for other musicians. And I was very tech savvy at the time with all the newest, when social media first started, really getting going. And we did a lot of promotions for other musicians, and then she invited me to go to speak with her. She was invited to speak, and she asked me to go along and speak with her as well. So that's how I got into that.
What did you speak about that day? Do you remember?
I believe we were talking about musicians promoting themselves on social media. At the time, I think it was more along the lines of Facebook pages and Twitter. I think it was pre-Instagram. actually. So, and then, things move really fast with those, right now it seems like Facebook has fallen out of favor and Instagram is all the rage. And now I lean on other people for that to do that for me because I can't keep up with it. But yeah.
Yeah. I'm just as a podcaster and a musician and somebody who tries to stay in touch with people, I have, especially recently, really become overwhelmed with social media and I've even gone a little dark, not dark as in I'm posting dark content or anything, but just haven't posted a lot, which is bad, of course. But yes, I need to get some help soon. It has been decided. Definitely. How long have you employed a team or a person to help you out with that? How long has that been happening for you?
Less than a year. And I have this big issue. So I had so many, there's so many companies that will say, oh, well, let us do this for you and let us do that. And I didn't really I wasn't really looking to spend a lot of money on somebody else hosting for me. I really don't like the idea of anyone speaking for me, putting words in my mouth. I used to actually do that for other artists and they would hire me and I would go make all their posts because they couldn't be bothered to post. And I tried to get as close to what I thought their voice was to represent them as they would represent themselves. But I could never really let anybody do that for me. I feel very strongly about what I believe, and to have somebody else speaking on my behalf, I just was never comfortable with that. So what I've really only hired out for is to help building the audience, and it's been with organic growth. Because I also hate that thing where it's like, well, we're just going to add a bunch of fake followers and then have like nothing come of it. I had an incident. It was some time ago. It was with Facebook when Facebook pages were first all the rage, and I had a friend who was also a musician who started a company on how to promote on Facebook. And he said, hey, at a discounted price, I'd like to offer you this because we need guinea pigs, basically, to show how our process works. And it'll just get you more followers. And I was like, well, that sounds great. And this is before I really knew a whole lot about how that process worked. And it worked great. I got a ton of followers. I ended up getting verified on Facebook. The problem with it is that the strategy they employed was that they found me followers in other countries, which was also fine. But they picked countries that don't really, they're never going to buy my music or go to my shows. Ever. Ever. They might like the pictures I post, but that's about it. And so there was really bad engagement, I think. And so I had a ton of followers. And now if I go back and look into my, because I know a little bit more about it now, if I go back and look into what my engagement is on Facebook and I look into what I have in common with my fans, it's almost nothing. And to me, that's, over the years, that's just become like a thorn in my side. To me, it's like, well, that's worthless because I have a ton of followers, but we don't have a lot in common. And I really need to focus on finding my own audience, somebody who is, people that are more in line with what my music's about and what I am about as a person and that we can connect on other issues, and as well as the music. And that's been something that I've tried to work on over the last year or so with whoever I'm working with, to help me with those things. But although I don't focus nearly as much on Facebook anymore as I used to back in the day when that was kind of like the big way to get people.
Is Instagram the primary focus now?
It really is, just because that is the realm of influencers and that sort of thing now that people, that's what they tell me. They tell me that's where it is. People, that's where people look for content, and for influence and that sort of thing. So, I'm sort of leaning on people who have led the way and how to do that, but also how to build fans that actually engage. that are actually in tune with what you're doing and not just get numbers. Cause I've already learned that from years ago that numbers are just ridiculous. I've had so many people that they're like, well, what are your numbers or something? I'm like, what does it matter? It doesn't really, unless it actually results in engagement and people listening and people showing up and people buying your stuff, then what a number doesn't mean anything.
Yep.
So, yeah.
Engagement is king.
Yeah.
So you're still spending a lot of time on it when you do. I understand you feel that you're not spending enough time on it, but you're still spending a lot of time on it because you're keeping your own voice, which is great. That definitely really matters. And you've already shared some things you've taken away from the whole experience, which is great.
Yeah.
I don't know if this is possible. I'm just going to tell you this, and you can give me your 2 cents on it, given that you're ahead of me and you've been exploring the use of some help. But I wondered if it would be possible to have someone, perhaps like you do with Instagram, but also spend the time for them to get to know me and the voice that I strive for, so that they're not in a situation maybe like you were in when you were posting for other artists, and maybe you didn't really know, but through having regular dialogue with them, not so that I don't ever have to post, but by having regular dialogue with them, they understand what my voice is, and they, we can sort of plan those things out a little bit and give them a little bit of free rein to do it, but try to keep me plugged in all the time. Do you think that would be a good strategy?
It could be, but it might also be expensive.
Sure.
I think the more these promoters, I don't know what else to call them, assistants, social media assistants, the more work they have to do, the more costly it is.
Sure.
And sometimes that doesn't work out budget wise, but I found that they will also, encourage you to, sit down a couple times a week. And we used to do this ourselves for other people. It's like, we couldn't sit there so many times a day and, post, so we just schedule posts well in advance. There's plenty of, apps out there where you can schedule. But I want this to go out this, on Monday, let's do it on Tuesday, so that every day or every so many hours you're putting something out, but you did it all on Monday. And then if something else comes up, you go in and change it up if you need to, and maintain it to stay current. But a lot of times, especially if you're promoting an album or something like that, or you're promoting your podcast, and you just want to just keep it in the forefront, because when something's posted, if people don't see it, they don't see it, and then it's out of circulation, and then it may come up later or may not.
Yeah, I'm looking at your Instagram as we're talking, so I have another rando question. Do you practice jiu-jitsu or martial arts or something?
I do jiu-jitsu and Muay Thai, kickboxing.
Cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
I saw a post too about Muay Thai, and I'm like, I don't know what that is, but I was looking at some of your Instagram stuff and thought, looks like jiu-jitsu. I don't know that much about jiu-jitsu either.
It's two separate things. Yeah. Jiu-jitsu is more grappling, and I do no gi, so it's not the traditional with the gi, which is the robe and the belt and all that other stuff. I do it just as plain clothes grappling, and Muay Thai is the kickboxing.
Yeah, and not to sound like I know anything about either, but I did not think they were one thing.
Okay. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I have friends and have listened to some conversations about jiu-jitsu, one of which cracked me up lately, but someone talking about, I think it was Joe Rogan actually, talking about that there used to be this ridiculous division of camps in jiu-jitsu where, I forget what they're called, but you just mentioned one of them where there's the particular garb that you wear, and then there was this other camp where no. And he said it was so stupid, people were bagging on each other if they weren't in the right camp, but anyway,
right.
It was kind of funny.
There's definitely a difference, a skill difference. I mean,
sure.
If you wear the traditional garb, you're learning more with that, the skill with that, learning how to use the clothes. With grappling, you're not allowed to grab somebody's clothes. So if you're really in a street fight with somebody and, you don't have that knowledge of like, oh, I could, grab this sleeve or this, collar or something like that. But there's more to it than just that, but that's just like one example. Mm-hmm. I'm aware of that. And even my coaches keep saying, you should just try the whiskey. And I'm like, I'm too cheap to buy one. and the classes aren't at the same time. And I'm very, regimented in my schedule. So I don't have the time. And they just roll their eyes at me. But, but it's good. It's great. I always need something that will never bore me. I get bored and I move on, and this is always keeping my brain, trying to work something out constantly. So it's helpful in that respect, and also helpful in just learning, skill wise, how to take care of yourself.
Sounds like a Christmas wish list item that you have announced right here on the podcast. Have you played at Amy and Gary's house concerts before?
I have, yes.
That's how you know Lindsay White?
Yes. We played, and I just met her that day, and sadly, and I really was sad about this. I had another show that night, and I couldn't stay for her set, so I didn't really get to hear her. I just heard her on the internet, so I didn't get to hang out with her. I hung out with her a little, before we performed, but I didn't get to stay and hang out with her afterwards. And she seems like a really great person. I love her posts and stuff on the, we're friends, of course, now on Facebook and all that. But yeah, we had a show together, but I had to leave immediately after my set. It was sadness.
Bummer. She's been on the podcast, and I just found her because of a Facebook group in San Diego, I believe. And I just happened to notice that you were Facebook friends, and just now saw her on your Instagram feed. So that's very cool. She is indeed a nice young lady, for sure. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So when you started, I had in my notes, I wanted to ask you about, these might tie in together, but I wanted to ask you about your support of emotional and mental health. And then a little while ago, as we were talking, you mentioned you were a sexual assault survivor, and in the context of when you started doing speaking and having a little bit of camaraderie and support around you so that you could be a single woman going out and doing these things seemingly all by yourself. So I suppose, I was going to ask, when you first started going back to the original comment, when you first started doing things like speaking, or you left your band, you mentioned, and started doing things on your own, what were, I guess, the big things that you worked on that might be of help to other female artists for whatever their situation is? And then if you can segue into, if I had it correct, that you are a bit of an advocate for emotional and mental health support too.
I guess when I went out on my own, I definitely had a ton of insecurities. I really just saw myself as just a lyricist. I didn't consider myself much of a singer, and I certainly didn't consider myself any kind of instrumentalist whatsoever. So I had a ton of anxiety. I had performance anxiety even when I was with the band. So being alone, a solo performer, playing the guitar and singing my own songs was terrifying. As a matter of fact, as soon as my band broke up, I told my producer, I can't stop writing songs, but I don't want to perform anymore. Let's just go in, record these songs, and we'll try to push them to other artists. Just, I think they're good songs, and I think other people might enjoy playing them. So that was the plan until about halfway through the album, making the album, which took about a year because I got pregnant in the middle of all of it.
Way to go.
Yeah, way to go. So it took a little bit longer than expected. And halfway, in between there, my husband bought me a guitar, and he's like, you don't want to quit this. I know you don't. It's just getting past your fear. And it just took me doing everything I could. I took some seminars on performance. I tried to, console myself by finding other artists that I could, we could share a gig with. I started with this one band where I would go in, I'd sing, I'd be the lead singer, and then she'd be the lead singer. We kind of go back and forth, and sometimes it would just be us solo artists, back and forth, and so it was kind of a swap sort of thing. I just kept doing whatever I could to associate with with other people, but also to just keep putting myself out there over and over and over again to the point to where I would get comfortable. And that took a long time. I think for me, and this goes in every aspect of my life, because I have suffered from a lot of anxiety. that the more I learn about a situation, the calmer I feel. Like if I feel like I know every aspect of it, even how I'm reacting to it changes. Like I can process it better. Well, you're nervous because of this, or I kind of tend to get like a control freak about every little aspect. But it in some ways it does calm me down, and that's what I did. Eventually, still new situations will throw me for a loop a little bit, but I'm not nearly as anxious about performing or sharing new material or whatever it is. I sort of figure, okay, I got to do this, and here I am. I'm in the middle of it, and that no matter how anxious you get, once you get past it, you'll be fine, and that sort of carries me through.
Sure.
So, but it did take a while to get there. And so the second part of, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, you seem so not anxietal.
No, I am very, even so, like I have, I was asked to perform Christmas songs, and it wasn't until last year that I started doing any cover gigs at all. I've always only ever done my own material. And so all of a sudden I was asked to do a couple of gigs that involved cover material. And I thought, well, the money's kind of really good and I kind of need it because I'm going to go in the studio and I want to have funds to be able to pay all my musicians and, do it the right way. And so I took it and I did it. And even that was nerve wracking at first because I'm like, okay, here we go. I have this really evil little voice in my head that hyper critical of every little thing I do. And then it takes me a while to convince myself that, that voice is it's your voice. You're the one doing it. Half the people here have no idea what that voice is saying to you. And they're just, they're just there watching, just waiting for you to, do your thing. And most of them will be happy with it. So
yes,
most of them aren't the musician in your head going, well, you were just a little bit under that note, or you forgot that word, kind of thing. So
yeah, I do that to myself a lot. I have the voices too. And was I correct in that you among your advocacy, you try to have conversation about emotional and mental well-being?
I do, because I'm also a suicide attempt survivor, and I've just seen so much of it, especially this last year. It's been bad. We've had the conversation many times here in our home because of the loss of at least 3 students that our family was somewhat acquainted with from suicide. And it's just been tragic over the last year and a half. So, I'm pretty open about my suicide attempts that happened in college. And, it's a number of factors. It's that I did suffer from depression, anxiety for a long time, but I also had an adverse reaction to the medication I was given for depression, anxiety. And sometimes that can happen. Sometimes that little disclaimer that says, if symptoms get worse, that's a possibility. That's exactly what happened to me. So I do, try to speak out about it whenever I'm asked about it, or when it, it comes up in public, just to encourage people and to let them know, that there is hope. There are different coping mechanisms. They're not alone. I've certainly been there, and to me, it's just like, it's one of those things. It's like, accept the fact that you feel this way. This is a real feeling, and many times it's a warranted feeling, because there's just stuff is going wrong in your life, and it just doesn't feel like it's ever going to end, but it absolutely does. It absolutely does end. It absolutely does change. It's never static, and you will get past it. So, yeah.
Well, thanks for sharing that. And my interest is, I was speaking with my wife just the other day, and I don't remember exactly why. I'm sure it was because I was thinking of, one of the artists I'd spoken with, but that I have an interest in it as someone who has suffered from what I would consider mild cases of, and brief episodes of depression, maybe just, legitimately a couple of times in my life, one of them somewhat recently, and I've had the good fortune of, good fortune of never having to lean on medication, and I don't know if this is of value to anyone, but when I say this, but my most recent episode, I actually picked up some books and did some reading just to try and learn some things about the inner workings of my brain, and I think it kind of came out for me that I had a lot of things or some things at least in my childhood that, and probably still do, but in my childhood that were lurking about. But once I started talking about them a little bit, it seemed that a lot of things sort of released. But not that it's all that's the end of that, but I'm certainly in great I guess mood, for lack of a better word. Yeah. And it was a brief thing, but I've had several guests on the podcast, and just in doing homework, I'll see that they're active in offering support online, and I've even had some just come straight out and talk about it without even being solicited. So thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of times that I think, for me, like I said, learning about it's been helpful. Learning about how depression, anxiety, the actual chemical process in your body, how that works, helped me immensely, because knowing that I also had a predisposition for that genetically, and then having experienced trauma. But another aspect that ties into, music, was that at the beginning of my career, all my songs were, they were born from that depression and anxiety. And I actually resisted getting help for it because I didn't want to lose my music. And I was convinced that, who would I be if I didn't,
Yes, yeah. I understand.
And it took me a long time. It actually took me Jason Mraz. Jason Mraz converted my life because I saw an artist who was actually happy and loving and just sort of enjoy whenever he performed, to say, this doesn't have to be over just because you're no longer depressed or you're no longer, broken in some way that you've somehow tied to your entire identity. So it drives me nuts when I see, it drives me nuts, but at the same time, I have a lot of, compassion for artists who don't seem to be able to let go of the pain and the trauma that they've, that's their whole thing.
Sure.
That's their whole career is that depression and that anxiety. And I just think, it's okay to let it go. It really is.
Yeah. That's a great thing to say. And I've observed it, and we've all observed it in celebrities, and I've observed it in probably people that I know personally. And the reality is it can hinder productivity and just our general well-being and creativity, and when you're finding a constant balancing act. But, sometimes the balancing act needs to be fought. And that's what we do to survive. So speaking of cover music, which you mentioned, one of the first things I saw when I started exploring your work was a cover of Suedehead by Morrissey.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Tell me about that. I love that song. And let me. No, you don't. But I'll tell you.
No, I will.
Well, I'll tell you why it caught my attention. I like the album from which it comes, and one of the first, actually, I think the first real paying gig I got. The band, it was a cover band. Actually, I guess they did some originals too, but it was a cover band, and one of the artists they introduced me to was the Smiths, and we, at some point, I don't think in the early beginning, but we started doing stuff off of that Bone and Drag album, including, I don't know if you're familiar with it, November Spawned a Monster, which is an odd song to do, but it was a lot of fun. And Suedehead. Yeah.
So I'm waiting for that shoe to drop where Morrissey somehow finds out about it and just drags me no end about the horrible cover I did of his song. This is my idea that, that Morrissey would hate it. But the thing is that song tied into a pretty dark period of my life. And I think when we covered it, when we were doing that album, I was going through so many different phases and so many different seasons in my life that seemed to be rapidly changing. And that just sort of, that song, when my producer was like, let's do it. Let's do a cover. And I was like, well, then if we're going to do a cover, I want to do this song, because this song is sort of goes with the mood of a lot of the songs that I've written for this album in my own head, whether it would mean anything to anybody else. I had no idea. And we decided to do it. I think we both kind of like, we both look back at it and go, okay, well, we did it. But I'm not sure. But I still have people, like, I'll go and I'll look at, I'll get a notification from some website and it'll say, well, this is your most played song. Or I think it's like Pandora or something. It'll be Suede Head. And I'll be like, great. Everybody thinks, but yeah, I have at least a couple of songs like that. Some that I've written to that I just go, okay, I wrote that and it was at a season and time, and I'm not sure I would ever approach it in the same way again. Sure. But it's interesting that people will gravitate towards it and like it. I'm always surprised by that.
Well, I think it's a great cover, and yes, it's like I think it's the most played thing that you have on Spotify, which is why I noticed it. And who knows if Morrissey would like it, but I don't really know what he likes or doesn't like.
I don't even want to know. I never want to know. Never.
No, it was good. I liked it. Tell me a little about your writing process.
All right. Well, I went through this whole period where I only wrote when some major emotion like overtook me. And then because I started out writing poetry, and I would write about the state of my being, which was often like, highly dramatic. And so then when I went into songwriting, it was really all about, what's going on in my life and what is the most compelling emotion I'm feeling right now. And how do I write about that? And that, in those cases, I would write words and then melody and figure out like chord progression after that. Now it's different. Sometimes I'm just playing on the guitar and I'm just coming up with, just different ideas of sounds I want to hear. And then a word will come to me. And then I can't get that word out of my head. And then I start just working backwards from there, just thinking like of all the meanings that word has, and eventually tie it back into something that I've connected to in my life or in somebody else's life that's close to me, and start writing about that idea. Then I sit there and I write down literally everything associated with that idea, everything I can think of that's associated with idea, and particularly as every feeling associated with that idea. I have tons of notes that say, it's this situation like when you see somebody and you just see them differently all of a sudden than you ever have before. And this will be like notes that I have. And then I'll just start gathering words, random words that fit in with that over and over and over again. I'll just have these papers with words written all around them until I start piecing it together like a puzzle.
It sounds very Mick Jagger.
Is it? I don't know his process at all.
Well, I've seen only from a doc. I guess it's a documentary of the making of Exile on Main Street. There are some scenes where they were trying to piece together lyrics for some of the songs, and you see all these Post-it notes of things, and like, oh wow, they just sort of like, they just pieced some ideas together and found some things that rhymed and worked out well in the song. But that's where I got that from.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's an interesting process. And so there was about a 2.5-second audio glitch. So I want to repeat something I think you said.
Okay.
You used to start by writing the lyrics, and it's sort of flip-flop now, and now you're starting the melody on your instrument and then kind of working your way backwards with these ideas that you described, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that came from being, it was 2012 that I decided to do a song a week. Mm-hmm. Just as a project, like a personal project. And it was Ira Glass having that whole speech that he did about how how do you get better at something? You have this inner critic that says everything you do is horrible because you have a certain amount of taste and you don't live up to that. So what do? You write every day. You do something every day or every week. You set a goal. And so then I thought, that's genius. I'm going to do that. And so 2012, I said, every week I'm going to have a song. But the thing I also did was say, every week I'm going to actually put the song out on my blog like an idiot. I committed to putting out a song a week, and some of them were awful. They were horrible, but I did it. And I did it for a year. And I was kind of proud of myself that I actually did it. And then after that, and so I had to come up with a new process because I wasn't feeling dramatic every week,
Mm-hmm.
But then I started joining these songwriting groups, and where it was, you turn in a song every week and it had to be at least a 2-minute song. So, it wasn't this full blown out like 4-minute song or 3.5-minute song or whatever. At least it was just, the limit was 2. So you could actually skate by on some of them.
Mm-hmm.
But, I had to have a new process because I couldn't, I had to just start playing with things and just seeing what came out. Just throwing some stuff out there.
That's cool. I like it. Okay, I want to be respectful of your time, so I'm going to rapid fire a couple things at you. I'm not sure how quickly you'll be able to answer this first one, but I noticed that your song, This Is a Call, which is a newish, right? A new song, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I noticed that it's currently available, or at least I read, I don't know, things move fast, I realize, but currently available to your subscribers on Bandcamp and available to others on all major distribution outlets. And maybe that's already progressed to that point. But I wondered if you could speak a little bit to the subscribers on Bandcamp. Are you doing anything like that elsewhere? I think this is the first time, it could be the second, but maybe the first time I've asked someone who looked like they had a subscription thing going on Bandcamp. How long have you been doing it? Is it working? Are you going to continue doing it?
I'm going to continue doing it. As far as it's working, it's hard to gauge, actually. It's not one of those things like, this is a big moneymaker here kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But it allows me to have a group of people, like a focus group, basically. So I put out songs that, they get everything I put out, whether it's fully produced or it's a demo. Usually, every month I put out at least one demo of a song that I'm working on, or a song that maybe I've finished and I want to put out, but I haven't gone to the studio and fully, fleshed it out or anything. And then to get feedback from this smaller group of people who, they want to be part of that. They get all the fully produced stuff, and then they get the raw stuff as well. And I think that I hope that's beneficial for them. I hope they enjoy the music, but it also gives me, like I said, a focus group to help me gauge, how well a song is doing or what works about that song.
I think that's a great idea, and I'm not even going to mention how much it is that I'm reading here, but it is a deal. So if you find out that if you listen to Laura for the first time on this podcast or sometime afterward because you're curious, I think you should check it out. It is a deal for sure.
Yeah,
and it looks like you have a lot of stuff.
You definitely get a lot of content.
Yeah, I like that.
A lot of content.
And then, new question: what do you struggle with in your music journey, if anything, today, and how are you overcoming that?
Okay, good question. What do I struggle with? I think right now, personally, what I struggle with on the music front is that I'm just so over the self-promotion. And I don't think anybody would get that because I do promote myself, but I really am like,
I understand.
It's just like, I don't want to have to, I really only ever want to post stuff because I have, I genuinely have something to say. Mm-hmm. And I understand that I have to, like, especially if I have a show that requires that I promote it, for the venue, for other people that are on it. I don't have a problem with that. I mean, I feel like, okay, that's justified in my mind, but everything I do, I have to really feel, I have to balance between, okay, this is also a business, so you do have to do your due diligence and promote yourself. But I'm the kind of person that really wants to not promote myself. And it used to be because I didn't like myself a lot, or I didn't believe in myself. Now it has nothing to do with that. I do believe in myself, and I do like myself to a lot more than I used to. I'm like, God, who wants to hear, every little thing, kind of thing is where I'm at with that. I do, though, have a good mentor and friend who is an online personality, and she will often remind me that there are perspectives that you share in your music that mean a lot to people. And those same perspectives, when you share them, verbally, whether you're speaking a video or it's a blog or it's just, that can be beneficial for other people. Like you're just sharing your experience or something you've been through, or even sometimes your perspective empowers other people to say, okay, thank you for saying that because I was afraid to say it. And now you've said it. And I feel that way too. So, I try to balance those things. I try to say there's the half of me that says, if your opinion's just like everyone's opinion, it's just an opinion, who cares? And the other part that goes, sometimes it's helpful to share what you're feeling, what you're going through. So it was a little struggle there between, sharing and not sharing, oversharing and not sharing enough.
Mm-hmm. I think that's wonderful advice. Yeah. And I suppose we all have to remember that sometimes somebody's going to hear your opinion or your perspective at just the right moment in their life, and it may not even be the first time they heard it, but it resonated. So that's really good. And we also have to remember that sometimes we are operating in a bit of a silo, and we don't realize until one day somebody comes out and sends us a message and says, hey man, I just want you to know that something you did really helped me, or I love what you're doing. And it sort of makes you, gives you a little perspective back to realize that it's okay to share your your inner thoughts. Yeah. Okay, last one here. Unless you don't want to answer it. If you were starting your music journey over again, what if anything would you do differently?
What would I do differently? If I could skip so many of those years that I was just terrified, that'd be great. But then I wonder if that would yield the same result. Mm-hmm. Because I just think there's so many, I have friends that, there's a certain amount of just where you just put yourself out there, like fearlessly, and amazing things happen. Though I don't know that time would have changed that for me. Like, I don't know if skipping that is possible. I don't know that that's even still possible now. But I think it'd be more something what would change about myself would be to be more fearless about not just promoting myself, but about not letting the insecurities, keep me from doing stuff, because I did for a very long time. Yeah. I suffered from agoraphobia after my first son was born because I had really bad postpartum, and leaving the house was a big issue. Like even just leaving out the front door. So then that was on for about 2.5 months. So there were things like that, like I wish I could just erase those things, but who knows, maybe that not leaving my house helped me in other ways that I wrote more, and I interacted with people in different ways than I would have, probably more openly online than I would have face to face. So maybe it's hard to say.
Yeah.
I don't know. The answer is I don't know.
Well, thanks for playing.
What I would change.
Yeah. No, I realize it can be a tough question, and I appreciate you sharing what you did. You know what, Laura? Our conversation has been an inspiration to me. I really appreciate your time, and
thank you.
I look forward to staying in touch. I hope that I can find you one day performing when I'm passing through Texas and go through San Antonio. It's been way too long for both me and my wife. And I will definitely be talking to you soon.
That sounds great. It was wonderful to meet you, and thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
The pleasure was all mine.
It's hard to stand tall. Don't wanna make waves, you said with your silence. There's comfort in cold, and no words chances. Where do you hide when it comes to your door? Can't stand on a line with so many lives in the balance. Now is the time. What are you waiting for? Where did you go? Courage in tow, hanging your head and your heart follows. Where are you now? Don't let me down. I need to hear you, so speak up now. You need to say it loud. You need to let it out. Let it shake the walls and bring them down. Where did you go? Courage in tow, hanging your head and your heart follows. Where are you now? Don't let me down. I need to hear you, so speak up. Where did you go? Courage in tow, hanging your head and your heart follows. Where are you now? Don't let me down. I need to hear you, so speak up now. I need to hear you now. This is a call to you on your island.
Hey, thanks for listening. Question for you. Are you struggling to move your music journey forward? I can help. If not personally, then by referring you to the next best available resources. Schedule a free 15-minute call with me to find out if I can indeed help you. It's easy. Just visit unstarvingmusician.com/coaching to schedule your call today. Look for links to just about everything covered in this episode in the show notes at unstarvingmusician.com/podcast. This episode was powered by the Unstarving Musician's Guide to Getting Paid Gigs, How to Get Booked and Paid What You're Worth Over and Over Again. It's available on paperback, Kindle, and ebooks just about everywhere you can find them. It's also available as a standalone podcast called the Unstarving Musician's Guide podcast. You can learn more about the book and companion podcast at unstarvingmusician.com/book. I'd love it if you picked up a copy and would love it even more if you left a review. With much gratitude, peace, love, and more cowbell.